All I ever wanted was for my wife and I to live comfortably. But the longer we stayed together, the higher our bills became. We'd already fought off debt from college, barely scraping by. Even after we paid them off, we were only able to afford a tiny apartment on the outskirts of New York. Sidewalks laid cracked everywhere, while finely condemned buildings sat sadly against their crooked foundations. Crooked lampposts that hang only by electrical wires. Graffiti marked every street corner, and bland art that existed without rhyme or reason. Homeless people could be found on every street corner, a constant reminder of what would happen to my wife and I if I failed to keep up with our payments. However, I managed to make somewhat decent money as a plumber, but even then, it sometimes wasn't enough to deal with the loan sharks, the hefty utility bills, the food prices, and gas money. I was willing to do anything to get us out of there. And that is where I encountered gambling. I was willing to take the risk. I'd take any chance to obtain a reward, even just a small one. It started out with a handful of poker games. Then I moved on to scratch tickets and slot machines. All I needed was enough to get by. Unfortunately, obtaining a payday from the casinos was impossible. I started growing desperate, which only led to more debt. The whole cycle sucked me down like Odysseus' ship into Charybdis' maw. Just like that, my relationship with my wife began to tear apart. My wife and I were once so close. Before we married, there would be days that we'd work together at the wood shop, creating 3D prints of various sci-fi characters in video games. Other times, we'd study the components of circuits and use them to create elaborate lighting displays whenever Christmas arrived. Our wedding day was supposed to be the greatest day of our lives. Instead of relying on the help of others, like we did back in college, we relied on ourselves. But my actions tore all that apart. I didn't know what else to do either. A few nights ago, I arrived at my apartment, having completed a 10-hour shift fixing drains of several upper-class tenements. I rested my hand on the knob, expecting the worst from my wife. Sighing, I pushed the door open. The moment I did, she was already in the front hall. Her eyes were scrunched, and she was holding a bank statement, smacking it for emphasis. "Care to explain?" she demanded. I rubbed my temples, removing my scum-covered overalls and plopping them right into the nearest laundry hamper. We locked eyes. Breaking eye contact with her would only ignite her anger further. She was holding another piece of evidence of my failure to strike it rich. All I could do was stand there sheepishly, tail tucked behind me, and wait to get ripped a new one. No words would come out of my mouth. She marched up to me, holding it in my face. "Frank, you wasted $3,000 at the casino again, didn't you?" my wife bellowed. I set my toolbox down and washed the pipe gunk off my hands, looking down for just a bit. "Turn around and look me in the eye." Resting a hand on my eyes, I glanced over her petite frame. Then I began to speak. "We can live comfortably if you just give—" "Enough of your excuses. We nearly lost our apartment twice from all the betting on the slots. You wasted our heating money on roulette. And now this. The landlord wants $4,000 in 2 weeks. And if we can't get it sorted out, we're going to lose our apartment." I held up my hand reassuringly. "Look, just let me figure this out. I'll think of some way to get money. You better, otherwise we're getting a divorce. You got it?" Without another word, I put on a casual outfit and exited for some fresh air, shutting the door behind me. I gazed back at the unpolished apartment number on the frame. Wincing, I clenched a fist and descended the rickety stairs. Eventually, my boots hit the cracked pavement and I headed off. I stood outside a graffiti-covered subway station, pacing around, hands in my pockets. My fists constricted as I pounded a nearby wall. There's no way I could have been able to make that kind of money. Craps were too unpredictable, arcade machines were always rigged, and roulette was too high in stakes. Seeing red, I screamed and kicked a wall as hard as I could. My foot throbbed, and once I was done with my fit, I broke down sobbing. The sidewalk darkened with my tears. I pressed my head against it, clawing at it until my fingernails turned crimson. Then I felt a tap on my shoulder. Wiping my tears away, I glanced over. A card was lying on the floor. Its borders were covered in green dollar symbols. The rest of the card was a silver color, shiny enough to reflect my face in it. Written in gold letters were the following: Aces High Casino. Win 1 round of blackjack and earn $50 million. No monetary wager needed. Table 777. My eyes lit up. All I had to do was win 1 game of blackjack and I'd be rich. Dimples formed at the corners of my cheeks and I pumped my fist. I nearly clicked my heels in joy, but I decided against it. I'd already caused enough of a scene already, and I wanted to make sure nobody knew my secret. When I flipped it around, it had an address also written in gold letters. Despite the address being in an unknown area, I still managed to pull it up on my phone's maps and arrive without much struggle. The casino itself was a pigsty, to say the least. Smokers polluted the air and the prison-gray interior. Slot machines with broken lights clicked and whirred while cheap dice clattered against tables with peeling felt. Meanwhile, the concrete floor was covered in colonies of roaches while neglected beer bottles sat against the rugs of several tables. The only thing that was well kept was the bar and a room draped with navy blue curtains and gold sashes. Emblazoned over the doorway was the number 777. This was the first time I'd entered a casino smiling. For once, I thought this was my lucky night. When I pushed the curtain away, they revealed a room with an ornamented black wallpaper, an assortment of oak desks, and other furniture. The walls were covered in fine Baroque paintings. On the floor was a single blue carpet covered in opulent tapestries. I followed the back wall to a single dealer table coated in green felt. 2 seats were present, with one person taking the seat on the left. He was shaking with what I assumed then was excitement. Behind him was a dealer, a trim man with blonde hair and a top hat over his nose and eyes. He wore a dapper tuxedo free of blemishes that shimmered in the light of a single hanging gas lamp. His skin was pure, free of moles, glistening with a slight amount of glitter. "Why, hello there," the man spoke, his voice slicker than the gel in his hair. "Are you here to win big?" Unlike the loan sharks, his teeth were cleaner than a freshly washed plate. "Yup, deal me in," I said, straightening my back, shuffling into the last seat. The other player had his jaw locked together. His eyes were drooping and bloodshot. Sweat pooled around his brow like glass beads. Just like him, I always felt nervous about losing, so their reactions were understandable. "You know the rules of blackjack. I deal out cards. You say hit me if you want more cards. Get closest to 21 without going over. Dealer only draws 2 cards, and you can also surrender your cards for half your bet. When you don't want any more cards, say the word stand," the dealer said, shuffling his cards through his hands and manipulating them like a sculptor with a ceramic pot. I double blinked. "Wager? What do I bet with?" "Play a game, and I'll tell you." The mystery man focused on passing out the cards. First, he brought out 2 cards for himself and dealt 2 more to each player. Instantly, he flipped over his cards. Jack King, 20. I clutched the velvet black card, seeing what I was dealt. A 10 and a 7 of hearts. I forced my face into a neutral smile. My stomach twisted. There was no way I could get 21 that easily. "Surrender," I said, pushing my cards to the dealer. All he did was shuffle the cards and toss me 2 more. They didn't even bother looking up at me during the process. The other players started clutching his stomach. His smile vanished. I carefully looked over the guy's cards. 7 and a 2 of clubs. "Hit me," the guy on the left choked out. An ace of spades. Total of 10. Sweat trickled down his head like a shower in April. His eyes welled up with tears, while foam developed in the corners of his mouth. I raised an eyebrow, wondering what his deal was. I knew the stakes of gambling, but my sixth sense was telling me something was just not right here. No, that couldn't be true. Even if there was some kind of string attached or fine print I didn't read, I couldn't risk giving up on that kind of money. Besides, this might have been my only chance to obtain such a vast reward without much risk. "Hit me," the man wheezed. 5 of hearts. His teeth chattered. While I waited for my turn, I stood up and walked around the room, getting a closer look at all the ornate gadgets and such. My eyes focused on a painting on the leftmost wall. It resembled a man in a rich military regalia, but something made my hair stand on end. His upturned white mustache looked damp, and his face sagged like they were crying. Linear, stick-like shadows were cast on the sleeves. Edging forward, they came into focus. Hands. I followed their form outward, which extended into oily, dripping arms. Shh! A faint noise echoed from somewhere in the room. "What?" I mouthed, turning an ear to the source. Shh! It came from the painting. I backed away, hands at my side. Was someone dragged into that painting? "Where are you going? You forgot to pay up," the dealer yelled back, hands slamming on the table and pulling out a sack of navy blue poker chips. I double-took. I thought the card said that no monetary wager was needed. There isn't. Then I looked at the ground. There was a second rug on the ground. The tapestry matched, but its pattern didn't match with the other rug. It was off-center from the rest of the decorations, like someone didn't even bother setting it up properly. Taking a closer look, I could hear faint whispers coming from it too. When I looked back up, the guy on the left was gone. I rushed over, checking his cards. A total of 25. Swallowing saliva, I stood in confusion, wondering what to do next. I scraped my fingernails against my palm. I needed that money. If I didn't get it, I'd lose my wife and my apartment. And what about loan sharks? Only God knew what would happen to me if I didn't pay up. What was I going to do? What would happen if I lost? Would I turn into another object, just like the other guy? Or would it be a worse fate than that? That's because there isn't a monetary wager. I'm still taking half of what you owe. In my game, your payment is in pain. A sharp stab punched my left side. It felt heavier than before, like my veins were replaced with tungsten. I grabbed my fingers around my chest. The area around the pain almost felt like a tumor. Brushing around the area, I could make out a cylindrical mass. I tried to inspect it some more, but the pain overwhelmed me, and I crumpled to the ground. I crouched down on all fours, trying to get back to my seat, but the pain froze me in place. Reaching out a hand, I called out for help, but I got nothing. Slithering away, I pulled back the curtain to the entrance of the casino. I spat on the ground from the bludgeoning pain. Don't feel out of luck? You can still surrender once more and have 2 chances left, the dealer smiled, adjusting his hat. It was only a glimpse, but I caught a look at his upper face. His eyes were on his hat, and his forehead was blank. The dealer looked plucked straight out of an Alice in Wonderland book. What or who was this guy? Think long and hard about it. I saw you arguing with your wife. I clambered back to my seat. I still didn't know what the dealer did to me. Something in me forced me to get back up and keep playing. More questions ate at me the longer I played. How did he know that information? Then I remembered feeling a tap on the back at Grand Central Station. The card that brought me here. He couldn't have been human. Was he some kind of demon? I didn't bother asking. There wasn't any way he would spill the beans about his nature anyway. After what seemed like hours, I managed to writhe back to my seat, slumping over the table like I'd just had the worst hangover. Ready to try again? The charming man said, resting his chin on his interlocking hands. Reluctantly, I gave him a thumbs up. He took back the cards and began manipulating the deck again. I analyzed every move he made. None of the cards were tricked. He wasn't second dealing, and he didn't have any aces up his sleeve. Never revealing anything under the table either. His honesty was the only thing that brought me any reassurance. Still, keeping an eye out was critical. The dealer revealed his cards. 2 tens again, 1 of spades and 1 of hearts. His face was harder than diamonds and glowing like one too. Not a pleasing glow, but one that vexed anyone that dared to glare at it. I looked at my cards, an ace and a 7, 18. Gripping my lower abdomen, I stayed crumpled in agony. The odds of getting a blackjack were slim, and stabbing pain skewed my thoughts. "Surrender," I wheezed. The words slipped out of my mouth like a dying breath of a wounded soldier. The dealer smiled, holding a pile of blue poker chips around him. He waved his hand over the mound and made an inaudible chant. Then they vanished. I held my hands over my face, bracing myself. Suddenly the pain doubled, shifting to my right like a mudslide down a hill. Now I knew everything the previous player was going through. I vomited out something hard and blue. It was a poker chip. Suddenly my guts turned and another 7 spilled out. My esophagus wound itself into knots, more contorted than cobwebs. "I forfeit." The man started to smile. "Without these?" With a thud, the hat-faced dealer pulled out a jar filled with a kidney and a piece of liver. They still oozed with blood that pumped and fit their containers. I remembered how the dealer said that there was no monetary wager. He never said there wasn't a wager at all, though. I paid in pain, and my wager was my organs. "You want them back? Then win them." He set them back on the ground. Now there was no choice. My fate was sealed if I tried to leave. I started to shed tears. If I didn't get those organs back and fast, I was done for. Even if someone saw me passed out on the floor, finding donors for organs wasn't guaranteed. And even then, it had just put me further in debt. Nothing would be solved. Then again, was trying to beat this guy even worth it? No, the reward was too great. Taking a deep breath, I sat back down. Reluctantly, I asked that he proceed. The dealer drew out cards like before. He took the cards and gave them a good shuffle. Plucking 2 cards out of the stack, he revealed them. A king and a 9. Another poker chip tumbled up my throat. I spat it out, red and blue plastic heaping together. Not paying attention to the mess I made, he handed me 2 cards. A jack and a 2. A 12. "Hit me." An ace. An ace could count as 1 or 11, depending on what other cards were drawn. Still had a fighting chance. "Hit me." A 5. His dead stare tore at my soul. I scratched against the felt, the wounds on my finger reopening. From the corner of my eye, I could see him frowning. "Are you going to play, or do you want all that money to go to waste?" "Shut up," I said through gritted teeth. "Hit me." I watched the dealer play out the last card. A queen. "You lose," the dealer said coldly, grabbing a pile of poker chips and holding them close. He waved his hands over the mound and made another incantation. Then they vanished once more. Everywhere at once, burning pain seared my skin, making me black out. When I woke up, felt my arms, they were covered in something hard and blue and plastic. My clothes were gone. I examined my extremities and my torso. My skin was missing, replaced with poker chips. They were shaped to fit every part. Cracks filled with blood gushed out with every slight movement I made. Horrified, I spilled my guts. More poker chips slid out of my throat. Piles of skin laid clumped to the side of the table in hideous pink and blood-red sheets. "I think you know what's at stake now." One try left. You better make it count, unless you want to end up as an object for all eternity. The rigidity of my plastic-coated skin made every movement expose more and more cracks, searing my muscles. I groaned as I raised myself up. Crimson liquid dampened the table. I pounded at it. This was it. I either walked out of here with my money and saved my marriage, or I lost and suffered a fate worse than death. Giving up was not an option. I gave the mysterious man a death glare, not even bothered by his resistance. He plucked out 2 cards, a 9 and a 10. This was my chance. Then my cards were revealed, a 10 and a 2. Fingers rattling, I took a deep breath and let the calmness seep into me. "Hit me," I sputtered. Another 2. Huffing, I opened my mouth to speak again. The dealer just stared at me, tilting his head like a vulture waiting for roadkill. The poker chips rattled again, grinding against each other. "Hit." I paused for a moment, collecting my thoughts. At a value of 14, I needed at least a 6 to beat the dealer, but an 8 or higher would result in disaster. Gulping down another chaser of saliva, I spoke. "Hit me." To my chagrin, a 5 slipped out of the hand. I was now tied. Staring at the pile of skin and my other organs, I closed my eyes and shook in horror. An ace or a 2 were the only cards I could draw in order to win. I looked down at my cards, sweat dripping on the table. With a quick glance, I gazed at the eyes on the man's silk hat. "Don't keep me waiting," the man demanded. I'd begun to hyperventilate. His stare grew more intense the longer I waited. His confident smile turned into a frown of irritation. Eyebrows and mouth were twisted into a hideous snarl. He rattled his fingers against the dealer's table. The cacophony made my ears go numb. Then I whispered, "Hit me." The man darted up, smiling back in anticipation. "I'm sorry, what was that?" I closed my eyes, expecting the worst. "Hit me!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. Then, the last card was revealed. A 2. I had won. My mouth dropped open. The sheet of skin unfurled themselves and flattened over me. 2 organ jars spilled over, their contents rising in a beam of white and torpedoing back into my body. Immediately, I yelped at the top of my lungs, clicking my heels and doing a little jig. I regained my strength, instantly looking around for traces of my prize. For several minutes, I wasn't able to uncover anything. Staring directly at the dealer's face, I asked him to reveal the prize. "I don't have it with me," he said blankly. Not listening, I scrutinized every inch of the room, looking beyond his station, checking under the table, everywhere. I searched everywhere for my prize, my happiness dissipating. With each step I took, my smile faded even further, twisting into a frown. My nose crinkled. "Where's my 50 mil?" I demanded, overturning the table, ripping off the ornate paintings and yanking the tasseled rugs off the floor. "You promised me 50 mil if I beat you. Do you realize what's going to happen to me if I don't get that money, you charlatan?" The strange man just stood there, not even acknowledging my plea. "You promised me money. You're a thief," I roared, pointing an accusing finger at him. "I only did this for my wife, to save my marriage. I almost gave up my life trying to help my family out. You can't take that away from me." The demon stuck his hands behind his back and shook his head. He rolled his eyes back in thought. Something was up with him. "You aren't like the other gamblers," he said. "What other gamblers?" I said, looking back. "They all wanted the money for worthless things. A mansion with fountains and a view, hookers, a trip to Tahiti." He paced around me, his face rather relaxed and calm. Never once did he lose eye contact with me. "But you had such determination to help your family that you would risk everything. I admire that. It took me a while, but I figured out that you're actually a kind-hearted person." I saw red and tried to punch him. He grabbed my wrist, shoving it back. "Listen to me. I understand your rage. There never was a prize in the first place. It was nothing but a lure to capture those that wasted their lives away. But there's one thing you don't understand. I thrust my hand back. I understand you nearly killed me for nothing. Yes, but that was before I saw you the way you really were. Listen to my words. Slowly I relaxed my posture, but I remained firm. Why should I listen to you? I can help you out of your situation. You owe me money, you snake, I said, my nostrils flaring. You never needed the money in the first place. Taken aback, I retreated. What do you mean? I said. My arms relaxed once more. You're a plumber, aren't you? I saw you come home from work. I also caught a look at your schedule. 40 hours a week for $38 an hour for 5 days a week. That's $36,000 a week for 2 weeks. You already have everything you need. But you don't understand. They need $4,000, I pleaded. He wouldn't budge. Trying to earn this money via dumb risks and chance will not get you anything. Look at all the things you've done wrong. And I want to change that, I said, wiping my eyes as they began to tear. But what am I supposed to do now? The only way you can earn that money is through grit and spit, he said, walking around me. You aren't going to find solace through good luck alone, and you already have the tools that some people don't. If you give up now, you might as well have lost. Think about it. With those last words, he raised his hand and snapped his fingers, disappearing without a trace. Slowly, I gathered my things and walked out of the casino, head hanging low. The next day, I was fixing an old lady's faucet, inspecting the leak. I wondered what the demon's words had meant. Before I stuck the wrench up to the U-trap, I remembered my pay. If I worked the same amount of hours as before, I'd only make $3,600. But if I pulled off some overtime and worked several extra hours, I might just be able to pay off the debt. I started staying up much later than before. Not long after, my wife started becoming suspicious. Eventually, she confronted me. "Frank, you've been staying up late. You going back to the casinos again?" she asked, hands on her hips. I closed my eyes, and instead of fear, calmness filled my veins, and my blood stilled. "Not this time. I've been putting in some overtime." Her face loosened up for just a moment before hardening again. I held my hands up and motioned my palms downward. "Listen, I've been horrible lately. All my gambling did was drown us deeper in debt." Her expression began to soften up again, her frown vanishing. "I want to change things. We used to work so well together, doing everything to help each other. Instead of fighting against each other, it's time we made our peace, and we bring us out of debt together." I held my hand out for her to shake. She kept her arm pulled back and folded like a pincer of a mantis. Inch by inch, though, she extended it and took my hand. The following day, my wife convinced me to go to therapy and get out of my addiction, which I gladly obliged. Simultaneously, she decided to start up another job working as an electrician. Day by day passed, and we pooled our resources as one. Before our eyes, bills were paid, and debt disappeared faster than our eye floaters. Our financial status wasn't the only thing that changed. Her once crusty mood lightened up, and she began to smile more. She began to believe my words and began to respect the changes I made. And then we paid off our rent. We got a letter from our landlord saying that we now were even. The moment that letter came in, we embraced each other. The only question now was, what were we going to do with the extra money? Not long ago, we ended up earning enough to create our own 3D project, this time of a companion cube. Day after day, we create more projects. Although we weren't as happy as our days back in college, we still could make the best of what we had. In retrospect, the hat-faced man put up a good fight, but I managed to come out of the casino with more than I'd gone in with. It wasn't exactly money, but it wasn't worthless either. You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier, since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.